into full. So good afternoon, everyone again. Well, this week we have the honor of having Jimena Lobo Guerrero Arenas, who just joined us here in Cambridge. She may be very familiar to some of you, but to us, she's going to be our new senior curator of the World Archaeology at the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. Jimena is interested in understanding the various ways how people engage, use, and discard material culture through time. And she has been able to develop these very interesting lines of research through her work on late pre-Columbian and early colonial metallurgy in South America, specifically Colombia, and using a truly interdisciplinary approach that combines material, written, oral, and visual evidence. Well, welcome to Cambridge, Jimena, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Carmen, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Thank you again for inviting me to this seminar, and also thank you to all of those who are joining us here via Zoom. Nice to see you on the screen. Well, before I begin, I would like to note that many of the things that I'm going to be talking about in this presentation have already been said by many of those who work in archaeology and anthropology museums around the world. I only intend to show from my experience how museums in Latin America, and in particular in Colombia and Ecuador, have been working in this same it's not passing, yeah. So do you know who knows what you don't know is the title that suddenly came to my head when thinking about the word uncertainty. I remembered a television program show from my childhood where a character, the one in the left-hand side of the screen, in an intellectual outfit was able to answer any type of questions with the truth, eliminating any possibility of doubt. From what I know, and sorry if I'm not really good here, but the UK has a long tradition of this type of television shows. It is highly probable that the Colombian one was a copy of a British show at that time. In any case, these questions and answer shows have served, among other things, of course, to reiterate the idea that there is only one answer, that is the idea of certainty, the idea that there is truth, and even more, that said truth resides in a few, such as those who eventually answer the questions correctly, or those who promulgate them, such as the intellectual figure to which I referred earlier. This guy on the TV screen. In archaeology, we know well truth is a problematic term, and it is not my purpose to establish here whether it exists or not, but to reflect on the possibilities that museums have to build not truths, but what I conceive as archaeological narratives based on consensus, but also dissensus about the past. I therefore refer to a kind of negotiation of the truth, or in plural also, as ways of maneuvering around uncertainty in archaeology. In a very recent visit before I came to the UK, I revisit the Museo de América, Museum of America in Madrid. I had the opportunity to go around and, as I said, revisit the Quimbaya treasure, the Tesoro Quimbaya. Without doubt, the most exquisite collection of pre-Columbian Colombian gold work outside of Colombia. This is, of course, a display that captures the attention of the visitor and is presented as one of the highlights within the museum, the tour that you go. El Tesoro Quimbaya, for those who don't know about it, is an impressive assemblage of 135 pre-Columbian gold artifacts kept in the Museo de América in Madrid, part of a large group of pottery, textiles, gold, and lithographic goods that were looted in 1890 from two Quimbaya burials in Quindío, Colombia, and that were donated to the Kingdom of Spain by the Colombian government in 1893. The collection has been a subject of a recent academic study compiled in an extensive volume. This is another picture of the treasure, and this is the book. This work sought to produce a holistic archaeological and archaeometric study, considering both the history and materiality of the assemblage to, of course, contribute to our understanding of the society that produced these gold objects. In other words, the work offers different ways of seeing and understanding this metallurgical complex. In the exhibition, some of these new, but also some of the old finds are presented as truths to the general public, reaffirming the existence of the Quimbaya, Lo Quimbaya. On the other hand, these groups of artifacts here that you're seeing on the screen are housed in the House of Culture, Casa de la Cultura of a small town in Salamina, a small municipality relatively close to the site of the discovery of the Quimbaya treasure. With artifacts that correspond to what in Colombia is known as the Quimbaya culture, or Lo Quimbaya. This is a map where you can see on the left-hand area is Quimbaya, and here on top of the word Manizales is where you can find Salamina, and here the Quimbaya, very close to the town Quimbaya, very close to where the Quimbaya treasure was found. This exhibition, as you can see, lacks any type of information. However, it's ours, and therefore also contributing of Lo Quimbaya, or the Quimbaya. Both groups, although visible different, are understood and assumed as part of the same archaeological complex assigned to the existence of cultural ascription is a long-standing problem in archaeology, but is even more so when said ascription detrimentally avoids the possibilities of doubt and uncertainty, those in which today in this talk I have deliberately wanted to understand as windows of interpretation of the past. In 2020, the Gold Museum convened a seminar that brought together Colombian archaeologists whose expertise is the Quimbaya world. They did so because they are actually in the process of renovation of the museum, all the galleries of the museum that is known as Museo del Oro Quimbaya, which is in Armenia. And the underlying purpose of this meeting was basically to ask what is ultimately what we continue to call Lo Quimbaya, the Quimbaya. In other words, to revisit the Quimbaya as a well-accepted truth. The discussion which was very enriching, of course, made at least for me two things clear. The need to avoid a direct relationship of archaeological sites with traditionally accepted terms, and therefore the urgency of opening the door to other languages and possibilities of interpretation about the past that allow us to understand that not everything Quimbaya, or what we have traditionally understood as Quimbaya, is or can be continued to be understood in the same terms. So I wanted to start this talk by showing these two examples as an invitation to think about what I imagine as the possibility of revisiting the stories that we have built about objects that are exhibited, displayed in our museums, rather than talking about how to overcome uncertainty in archaeology, which I think could be understood as one of the ways to construct archaeological truths for the public. I would like to think about its deconstruction, a deconstruction otherwise multivocal and negotiated. Uncertainty would then play in favor of the possibility of continued new interpretations of our past. I intend then to speak in light of two specific examples with archaeological collections belonging to museums and the role of communities around the construction and or deconstruction of archaeological narratives. The first one, in the right-hand side, the Casa del Alabado, Pre-Columbian art in the city of Ecuador. And the second one, University Museum, the museum center of the University of Caldas in the city of Manizales in Colombia. I want to point out that I am interested not only in describing the experiences and showing the results of the exercises, but also speaking from a somewhat more critical position, which is why I will end this talk with some comments that presuppose a decolonizing view of the truth, and in which we are forced to ask ourselves about the relevance and effectiveness of this type of exercises. So again, how do we know what we know? Or this idea about how we as archaeologists must have an answer for everything others don't know about the past is perhaps, of course, one of the most difficult questions to solve and one of the most complicated roles to assume, especially if you work in a museum where you actually you need to have an answer. In trying to tackle this question, I'm going to present these two exercises, and I'm going to start with Casa del Alabado. So La Casa del Alabado is a pre-Columbian art museum in Quito. The museum is located in a colonial house that was built in the 17th century in colonial Spanish, during the Spanish colony, It has in its collection around 5,000 archaeological objects belonging to ancient societies that, of course, occupy the territory that we know today as Ecuador. A selection of around 500 objects makes up the permanent exhibition of this museum. And the general idea of the museum is to invite the public to discover the worldview of indigenous Americans and explore in particular the aesthetics of and technical excellence of the ancient artists in Pre-Columbian Ecuador. So let's go to Quito at Casa del Alabado, Museo de Arte Precolombino. Every day after his school day, this child here, William, and it's actually William, no Guillermo, William, would arrive at the Alabado and enter the house like if it was his house. At just 9 years old and a few visits to the museum, William felt like this second home to him. It was usual to see him accompanying the facilitators on guided tours or in the educational room or running around. A little over 7 months or so passed since the Alabado's opening, and William somehow has become part of the museum. Before its opening in 2010, the Alabado, together with a group called Escultura, a group interested in working with cultural heritage sector, undertook a pilot project called Heritage Guardians, an idea initiative that sought to bring closer together and socialize the purpose of the museum within the local area, the neighborhood. For a little over a year before the objects were in place in the museum, even though the house was being adequated to receive the whole collection, the museum invited children from schools around, local schools, but also neighbors, the residents of the San Roque neighborhood. This is actually the place where the museum is located in central Ecuador, downtown Ecuador, the historical center of Ecuador that probably you know is a World Heritage site. So the museum invited its neighbors, people from this area, San Roque, that's also actually known as the Riobamba Chiquito, or the urban indigenous neighborhood, a neighborhood full of trades, traditional crafts, bustles, popular revolts, a very long tradition within the historical center. So the Alabado invited them to be part of a different experience. We know that museums must work together with the communities from which the collections come, as well as with the communities that they serve, but also applying in this particular case some common sense, that is understanding that we were the ones who were going to abruptly break into their territory, a foreign space already colonized by them, we embarked on a project of rediscovering our own museum proposal and the Pre-Columbian world, taking as a starting point alternate voices, the voices of our neighbors, voices that generally, of course, go unnoticed or are not taken into account at all when you're doing a museographical proposal. The objective was clear, getting to know what was the idea that our neighbors had about the Pre-Columbian past and how for them a museum of Pre-Columbian art should be. Throughout several months of encounters, good ones, bad ones, disagreements, of course, we dedicated ourselves to build, or better, to deconstruct an academic and hegemonic archaeological discourse based on the perceptions, opinions, interpretations, ideas, etc. of our neighbors. That, of course, were framed in a cluster of ancestral and traditional knowledge, typical of a neighborhood like the San Roque. And that's how William became our friend, a close neighbor, and an important ally for the museum. It was William who many times best managed to establish communication between visitors and the museum. A communication, of course, that was jointly built. So during the workshops, those that you are seeing on screen, the community recognized several of the archaeological objects for which we also had already conceived some interpretations, of course, from the academic literature. But from many of them, as it normally happened with Latin American museums, in which archaeological objects lack of information, like provenance, for example, we started to find with our neighbors some answers, suggesting additional details related, for example, with manufacturing techniques, origin, and so. This recognition served to strengthen a feeling of belonging and identity with the museum, which for us was very important, actually more important than all the information, the technical information that we were gathering. A specific case is explained in the following terms, and I open quotes here from one of the phrases that we were collecting from people. The shamans teach us to heal and meditate, to see the good and the bad. The herbs of the shamans are still used to cure bad wind. Yellow flour is used, pure tobacco, everything is mixed and bathed with this, and a prayer is made. It all still exists in the knowledge of the shamans. Several of the images in El Alabado allude to representation of shamans. Many of the eldest people who were with us in the workshops, including, for example, William's grandparents, recognizing these figures, their shaman grandparents and their traditional healing practices as those that are still carried out today just around the museum's corner in the San Roque neighborhood where they live. The San Roque actually is recognized as one of the places where you go for healing in entire Quito. A direct connection was then established between the museum, the objects, and the neighboring community. It was the neighbors who, at least throughout the first 8 months of Alabado's operation, share their vision and knowledge of the Pre-Columbian past, appropriating both the museum's spaces and the discourse around its objects. Time passed, new and different interests became the main concerns of the museum and the community, or at least this neighboring community, and those with whom we had previously established an open dialogue and a particular dynamic. This particular dynamic was then forgotten. So now let's move on to the museum center at the University of Caldas in Manizales, Colombia. The Centro de Museos of the University of Caldas in the city of Manizales in Colombia houses 4 different collections: natural history, archaeology, geology, and paleontology. The beginnings of the archaeology collection go back to when a local collector gathered several archaeological objects that later, in the 40s of the 20th century, served as the basis for the non-profit society that created a gallery that actually was called Quimbaya. In 1957, this gallery was then taken by the University of Caldas, where it was called the Anthropological Museum of Caldas. Starting in the 1980s, the collection began to be recognized as the Archaeological Museum, and since 1996, it became part of the museum center of this educational institution. Today, the collection is made up of approximately 10,000 objects, mainly ceramics and stone. In 2019, before the pandemics arrived, I carried out an experimental exercise with archaeology and anthropology students enrolled in the Heritage and Identity course that I used to talk. I invited them to critically read the information contained in the labels that accompany, that go in each one of the showcases, the whole display of the permanent exhibition, and in general, the content of the display and what is said about it. Thinking about simple questions such as those we are dealing with here today. Who is talking? What are we talking about? What kind of truth are we reproducing? Who do we know what we know? How do we know what we know? What do we say when we don't know? That kind of questions. What kind of information should we provide to the general public, etc. Some students found themselves rewriting the labels, questioning how flat and technical the information was offered or presented. Others decided to question some of the archaeological truths that the museum categorically presents. One of them, for example, signaled precisely the problematic use of the Quimbaya term, which is used also within the museum. On the other hand, the results pointed to the need to connect with the present, to think of interpretations of the past, not as absolute truths anchored in times other than ours, but as possibilities of understanding ourselves. In one of these were the types of labels they were creating, of course, very non-official ones. In one of the labels written by the students can be read, and I open quotes again, tell a story making analogies with the daily life of Colombian families and the possible use that was given to ceramics. For example, today water is stored and transported in buckets. In the past, people made and used pots, jugs. Ask, what would you use these pots for? It occurs to me that one of the ways to overcome uncertainty in archaeology lies in the possibility of going back to the certainties of our present, because ultimately, cultural memory is directly related to the present, which shapes both the perception of the past, or in the words of archaeologist Cornelius Holtorf, unquote, here, cultural memory is not about giving testimony of past events as accurately and truthful as possible, nor is it necessarily about ensuring cultural continuity. It is about making meaningful statements about the past in a given cultural context of the present. In this sense, the sense of making significant statements about the past in a given cultural context of the present, the Museum Center has carried out another project, which is called the Museo Rodante, like a rolling museum or something like that, on several occasions. This project consists of the installation of a display, like display cabinets or shelves with inside a van, actually, the one you're seeing on the screen, that moves from town to town around the county. There have been several purposes of this project, but at least two I want to point out here. On the one hand, to invite the community most related or immediately related to the museum, like university students, but also the inhabitants of the city, Manizales, but also neighboring towns to come closer to the archaeological collection. But on the other hand, the rediscovery and resignification of all these objects from alternative points of view inherent to the context of local actors. The Museo Rodante has become, in a way, a tool to overcome uncertainties to the extent that it has been the communities themselves in these remote villages of this territory that have come close to resignifying the objects from their own points of view. The Museo Rodante has reached a sort of local knowledge about the past that has always existed, but that most of the time we as archaeologists are unaware of. In particular, because looting in this region, the Quimbaya region, has been a common practice around this territory, and therefore many people know firsthand about these objects, but no one has or previously asked them about them. Locals recognize the existence of archaeological objects, their places of discovery, circulation, and recognize themselves as well as direct heirs of their different human groups settled in the past in what is now known as Lo Quimbaya. However, despite Lo Quimbaya makes sense to them, it does not in a single and straightforward way, or not in the same way that it is expressed in the Museo de América or the Centro de Museos. Lo Quimbaya is not a unit nor a single or complex box. It does not exist for all of them, since they all recognize themselves as different and many times not related to each other. During the workshops, they were therefore encouraged to tell us their stories about those differences or about what makes them different from each other, and about the way in which we could begin to understand Lokimbaya in a different way. So these last two exercises, the first of an experimental nature, the second a commitment to establish a relationship with surrounding communities, can be understood as possible ways to overcome uncertainty in archaeology. Today, various narratives about the past are built and they should not be ignored. Narratives that can be understood as powerful decolonizing tools that are moving away from the truth that exists in archaeology, particularly in archaeological museums. Communication with communities that participate in collaborative and experimental exercises can be useful not only in the search for information of an archaeological nature, for example, to solve questions such as use, origin, symbols, exchange, manufacturing techniques, and so on, but also in the consolidation of recognition processes and social appropriation of heritage that also contribute to the decolonization of archaeological truths, since they presuppose involving the communities in this construction of what is said and what is told. That is, they are reading multivocal exercises that put aside a linear and hegemonic vision of the past. However, and this is where I intend to make kind of self-criticism to what I need to ask, to what extent does this type of exercise, on the contrary, feed our possibilities for speculation and therefore uncertainty? I can formulate this as a question, of course. On the other hand, to what extent do these types of exercises become forms of manipulation of the past that go against those archaeological truths that we so eagerly seek, we as archaeologists seek, and that of course we often find? The answers to these questions are problematic and would surely could be part of an extra session for discussion. However, from what I have shown here today, it should be said that a possible way out of would be to think of negotiated narratives. I have to say that this is not a game of presentations, which is worth or weighs more, the scientific version or the community version, but it is about opening these spaces for negotiation and discussion and presenting them as such to the general public. Museums must aim not only to strengthen conservation, exhibition, storage, and research strategies, but also to strengthen links with the communities they serve and from which they are permanently nurtured. And one of the ways to do this would be to continue supporting multivocality and collaborative work. We are talking here about what Mariana Salgado has called an ecology of participation, a conceptual tool that would allow us to understand the process of participation in museums as a set of elements that interact and define each other, linking in museum practices, spaces, objects, and community, linking all these together. In other words, the constructions of meanings and knowledge, not thanks to, but with the active participation of what have commonly been called objects of a study. I mean, the people or the others, them, they, including, but so including them as protagonists in the process of construction of meaning. This collaborative work method that consists of the active preservation of heritage allow us to get closer to the knowledge and interests of the communities and their cultural practices around their attitudes, beliefs, and customs. Maybe there we could find the possibility of overcoming the uncertainty in archaeology. Additionally, in museums where institutional policies, privilege, hegemonic, and truth discusses the construction of this kind of dialogues and negotiations around these kind of topics could possibly and ultimately become a sort of tool to overcome uncertainty around those things we still don't know. So the attempt to order a discourse and make the production of knowledge accessible to the general public as a way of coping with uncertainty ends up becoming a form of subordination of other narratives. However, giving room or by giving room to these other forms of construction and transmission of knowledge, eventually, I would say that politically and culturally situated in specific moments and territories, such as the Quimbaya, which I have been talking about, we can also become, it can also become a possible way to face uncertainty. As much as history did at the time, I would say archaeology must intend at least to divest itself of this intention of generating truth, like truth with capital letters. And for the same reason, archaeological museums or those museums exhibitions that work with archaeological collections as well accept themselves as builders of stories, this type of stories that more than their truth seek explanations and generate different points of view. The possibilities of interpreting the past, such as those offered here in this talk by indigenous people of Quito or the communities, the local communities in Caldas, and those new insights, for example, such as those proposed by the students, may also eventually be accepted as tools to overcome uncertainty, or at least avoid the difficulties raised by those versions of the past that have remained static over time and have therefore become archaeological truths. In other words, perhaps might it not be that possibly we have at hand an interesting possibility to answer the forever question, what was this, without always ending up answering, it was ritual. And so I think it's it. I would, of course, want to thank the Casa del Alabado, Centro de Museos, and students of the University of Caldas. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Jimena, for this really, really wonderful talk. And it gives a lot of space for, I think, your future work at the MAA. It's really exciting to see where you'll be going next. So if people have questions, we are in the meeting format, which means we can see and hear everybody, unlike the previous webinar format we use. So if you have a question, you can click the smiley face reaction button, and there is a raise hand option if you would like to ask a question directly. So please, if you do have questions, use the raise hand function. If you would rather ask it anonymously, then you can use direct chat to me and I can read it out for you. So do we have any immediate questions arising? I'll give, while you're having a quick think, I had one question that sort of cropped up, particularly thinking about, you know, your future work with the MAA and its collections, and so many of the objects in the museum are dislocated and in places where, you know, they're away from their indigenous communities. And so how do you think you can bring their existence sort of into this cultural presence as it exists in Cambridge, but also keep that dialogue alive and negotiate, you know, these new meanings as you're talking about the cultural present?
Thanks for the question. I would say that as with the experiment I did with my students, because we normally tend to think that we need, I'm going to use the original communities, like the real communities, the ones that probably have real ancestors or things like that. But I would tend to think opposite, like we actually need to open that idea of and go and ask different type of communities, actually not related directly with the objects, in search of getting answers. Because of course, if I'm thinking about indigenous communities in Cambridge, that would be a problem. I mean, I don't really know, probably yes, they are here somewhere around, from Latin America, I guess, but not as many as we probably need for doing kind of research or workshop or something to find some kind of answers. But as I was saying, maybe going further than the actual communities, it will be interesting as well. And then I would say that, of course, we will then need sort of need to find a way of linking that answers from these other type of communities to the, again, the original ones, and see what kind of links or different approaches or points of view we can get from that kind of mix, I would guess. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that probably not stick with one community and open up the perspective of what a community actually is in relation to objects could be interesting way of approaching those questions or and answers.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions? Please do raise your hand or unmute yourself. Can't see any. I'll indulge in myself and ask another one then, because I'm particularly interested in this theme of whether uncertainty is something we need to overcome, or do we use it as that kind of space for interpretation. I know you use the term sort of overcoming uncertainty, but how do you think about uncertainty itself with archaeological data and archaeological objects? I mean, is it something for us to overcome, or is it something we should be embracing as giving us this sort of this space for dialogue?
Well, I think we don't really need to worry much about that. We need to, as you said, embrace it. I try to show it on the presentation that to think the opposite way. It will be interesting, probably in the search of getting answers instead of trying to find the answer. So going the other way around, for me at least, make a bit more sense. So it's something that is there, uncertainty. It's a problem, but I think if we don't really much worry about, it will be, I guess, easier to go further in actually answering our own questions about what is this or what is not.
Thank you. Any other points or questions people would like to raise? We're a very friendly bunch here, so please don't be shy about asking things, because we really want to open up discussion about all the running theme of the series. But I can't see any hands up. Oh, Dathia, yes, thank you.
Just to keep the conversation going, because I know if we were all here in person, we would be having it. It's just the screens kind of stilt us a little bit. Jimena, thank you so much for the lovely talk, and great to see you. I can't wait to see you in person. I mean, I agree with what you were saying. I loved the project that you did. I love the opening up the narratives to uncertainty and to having different voices coming into it. So I don't really have a question, just I'm really excited that you're here and to talk more together and work more together. And I think you're right. And I think for me, uncertainty in heritage, we've been talking about uncertainty, but also about dissonance. So the kind of key word in heritage is dissonance when, sorry, that's my email. Dissonance when different narratives, understandings, interpretations kind of clash. And they're usually, the response to it is to let's iron it out. Dissonance is bad. Let's either pretend it's not there or select a common ground that we can all agree on and present the common ground and not the bits where we don't agree. And it feels to me that kind of putting the more messy bits under the carpet isn't particularly useful, but also, as you say, the uncertainty, or what I'm calling the messy bits, could actually be a way of drawing people in. We don't know, come help us find out. What do you think? And instead of museums having to present knowledge and present answers to the questions, can't they just present the questions and say, isn't this interesting? We don't really know. What do you think? Let's think about it together. And especially with kids, help the kids, come in as part of the discovery and help us discover together, rather than just present them with knowledge and with nicely parceled packages of facts kind of tied up in string. So it's just to say thank you, and I'm looking forward to more chats and working with you.
Thank you, Dacia. I always imagine, I keep imagining showcases full of bits and bits and different narratives. As I said, it's not about if it needs to be 50% this academic part or the other percent non-academic. It's just that we need to actually do the effort of including those percentages within the showcases. Is something I think we haven't really done, I guess. Probably yes, there are some exercises out there, but but more constantly trying to do that in museums will be actually interesting for, as you said, children, starting children, but I guess everyone else as well. Especially, I think this academic world will be really keen to see that type of exercise, like trying to go out of the box or the we are actually used to say, don't talk, or I don't want to repeat the word truth, but is there is a fine line there, because what we say, it becomes actually eventually truths. So if there is various ways of seeing, telling things within Showcase, probably you won't see a single answer. You will see many different points of view, and it will be more difficult to see a truth, like in capital letters.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. It's almost having that confidence to be uncertain as a researcher, actually, and say, I don't know this. I know these things I do know, but to have the confidence to say, you know, I really don't know this, and that really does open the conversation. And I've seen that with the Gold of the Great Steppe exhibition, that the tiny microbeads, you know, the point at which we said we don't know how these were made, and that's where we've really captured people, you know, visitors and children, but also adults who are really interested. That's the point when people are really hooked in, because it's having the confidence to say we don't know, and then it invites conversation, and you know, that's particularly, as you say, with children, it can be quite powerful, I think, to be able to say that point at which you don't know something. Well, I think we've just hit our hour, so I want to say a huge thank you to you, Jimena, and an enormous welcome to the community here in Cambridge. Hopefully we will be meeting in person at some point in some form, but we're really grateful to you for speaking to us. I know you've very recently arrived in Cambridge as well, so you're still finding your feet, so we really appreciate you speaking to us this early on in your next career step in Cambridge. But hopefully, you know, do come and find us, and hopefully we can take these conversations further. So thank you. So next week, do join us at 4 o'clock. We are fairly certain that we will have Aidan O'Sullivan talking to us about his work with experimental archaeology. So we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.